Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blood of Englishmen virtual book launch and celebration. I'm really glad that you could join us and be here for this. This has been a long time in coming, which I'll talk about a little bit as I go along here, but we're just really happy to have your support, to have your attention. We know you're busy doing other things. So just kind of celebrating our literary work is really special, and we really appreciate that you're here to celebrate the work that all of these authors have done and everyone's done to put this whole thing together. So my name is Colin Mustful. I'm the founder and editor of History Through Fiction. We are a small independent press out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we publish strictly historical fiction. A few years ago, I decided to launch a short story contest just to kind of see how that went. In the first year, we had three winners that I published online, and then I took it a step further the next year and decided to do a paperback anthology. That ended up being our first anthology, which was called An End of Troubles, and has 10 stories in it. Now, this is our third short story contest, our second anthology, and it is called The Blood of Englishmen because our winner, Cecil Beckett, that's the title of his story, and his story is about the Red Baron, and that's where we get the title from, and that's where that cover image comes from. But yeah, without any further ado, I just want to say hello and go ahead and say hello in the chat. Please let us know where you're joining us from, maybe who you're here to see, and we'd just love to hear from you in the chat. You can turn your cameras on or off. I did disable the mics just to make sure there are no distractions. So what we have planned today is I'll be facilitating discussion here. I'm going to ask each one of our anthology authors to say hello, read an excerpt. If at any time during the event you have a question, just post those in the chat and I will monitor that. And it should be a good, fun, quick hour. Okay, well, let's start out with Rachel Henderson. Rachel, if you could say hello, let us know what story you wrote. Oh, did you have to unmic? Okay, sorry.
Hi, my name is Rachel Henderson. I wrote San Francisco is Buckled, San Francisco is Burning.
Thank you, Rachel. Next, we have Rob Hardy. Rob, could you say hello?
Hi, I'm Rob Hardy. I'm the author of The Presbyterian Settee, and I'm here in Northfield, Minnesota.
Thank you, Rob. Next, we have Morgan Want. Morgan, hi.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I wrote The God of Sight.
Thank you, Morgan. Next, we have Nicole Babb. Hi, Nicole.
Hi there, I'm Nicole Babb. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I wrote No Shelter.
And then we have Shay Galloway. Shay, hi.
Hi, I'm Shay Galloway. I wrote Diary of an Empire, and I am up in Olympia, Washington.
Thank you, Shay. And finally, we have Zena Ryder. Zena, hi.
Hi, I'm Zena Ryder. I wrote the story Lucky, and I'm joining you from Kelowna, BC, Canada.
Thank you, Zena. I'm just looking down at the anthology. This is the anthology if you haven't seen it. And who we don't have with us is Cecil Beckett, who wrote The Blood of Englishmen, Christopher DeWitt, who wrote Body 311, and Jacqueline Van Hoek, who wrote The Bright Leaf Legacy, and then finally Ezra Harker Shaw, who wrote The Violinist. Well, let's have one of our authors just kind of tell us about their story and read an excerpt for us. Rachel, would you mind starting us off?
So my story is about a detective wandering through San Francisco in the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake, trying to find a very wealthy man's pocket watch. So it's just like the days after everything is still on fire, it's complete mayhem, and he is laser focused on trying to figure out who stole this guy's watch. And I will read you an excerpt. The Presidio is bedlam, and San Francisco is still burning. Humans spilling out from every tent. Humans trampling every inch of grass. Mothers keening, toddlers shrieking, old men moaning. Soldiers bark orders into the crowd, orders to conserve water, orders to bury waste. Youngsters play jacks with broken up twigs and a pine cone. Camp stoves are cold, tempers are hot. Only the bread lines are orderly. Yount pushes through a clutch of men hauling crates of supplies. There's a high, sour odor coming off their skin and a sickly harmony in their panting breaths. He recalls his time as a patrol officer, nights spent wrangling drunks and hobos, the pitiable sounds they made when he rousted them from their rat holes. Dying dog sounds, somewhere between a wheeze and a rattle. Ellen took great care with his uniform in those days, made sure the blue was free of bloodstains and vomit. He felt sheepish about it. Bad enough for a grown woman to move in with her grown brother, no matter the circumstances. She shouldn't have to wash his dirty things. Morning after his promotion, he gave her money for the laundry around the corner. She said she was happy for the money, but happier for his title. Detective Yount, her brother, the investigator. Farewell, wharf bums. Goodbye, small potatoes. Big crimes only, forever and ever. Amen. If Ellen could see him now.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Could you give us a little more insight into the setting of this story and why you chose to set it there and write during this time period?
So, I was born in the Bay Area of California, and one of my very earliest memories was going to the Natural History Museum in San Francisco, and they had a fantastic display for the 1906 earthquake, where it's like hands-on. You go into this room and it shakes you for a couple minutes, and I think that combined with experiencing earthquakes really stuck it in my head, and I really love turn of the century history, and it's just such a horrifying, visceral setting that I thought it could be fun to try to make it, try to, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. Try to make it kind of come to life with modern concepts, like the focus being no matter how horrible the catastrophe, somebody will always be obsessed with something trivial, trying to put that in the framing of the earthquake.
Yeah, it really was such a unique angle, and I just love that you're able to take a history that most people know about, but find a way into the story through that character, that detective. So I think that's great. Well, next let's go to Rob Hardy. Before we do, I did want to tell everyone, I already told our authors here that the anthology is #1 on Amazon right now in short story anthology. So that's thanks to you guys out there that pre-ordered the anthology. Thank you so much. We just can't tell you enough how much we appreciate that. Rob, if you could tell us a little bit more about your story and read an excerpt for us.
Okay. So the story is about a piece of furniture that actually a real piece of furniture that was in the minister's office in the Presbyterian church where I grew up in Trumansburg, New York. And so the story is trying to imagine the history of this piece of furniture, how it got to the church, and what it meant to the people whose sort of hands it went through or who sat on it. So it's in 3 sections. The first section's in 1982. This second section I'll just read a little bit from is in 1828. In 1828, a body washed up on the shore of Lake Ontario. The body was bloated and fish-eaten and ghastly, but from a small scar still visible about the right eyebrow, it was allegedly identified as the body of William Morgan, who had gone missing 2 years earlier after making a deal with a printer in Batavia to publish a book exposing the secrets of the Freemasons. Depending on who you talk to around here, this Morgan was either a scoundrel and a liar or the victim of a conspiracy to silence him. He passed himself off as Captain William Morgan, but there were those who doubted the stories of his distinguished service in the War of 1812. He also claimed to have advanced to the degree of Royal Archmason, but again there were doubts, and the doors of the Batavia Lodge were shut against him. On the other hand, it's a fact that someone attempted to set fire to the printer's office where Morgan's book was being printed. It's a fact that after announcing his intention to publish the book, Morgan was suddenly arrested for an unpaid debt, sent to debtor's prison, released on bail, arrested again, and released on bail a second time. And after he was released the second time, he disappeared without a trace. 2 years later, a body washed up on the shore of Lake Ontario. These were the facts as W. Phelps laid them out for me in the office of the Lake Light, the new anti-Masonic newspaper in Trumansburg, New York.
Thank you, Rob. That's amazing. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how did you determine the history of this piece of furniture? Is it complete imagination? How did you choose which time periods to write about?
The very first part of it, the 1982 part, is actually kind of autofiction because at that point I was basically sort of homeless and spent a lot of time at the church and actually slept on this piece of furniture. And I knew that it was from the 19th century, and I had heard stories about how it got there. So it's sort of it's a true story, but I'm imagining the details and trying to bring some of the people from this village in the 19th century to life in the story. Really, I sort of became interested in history from growing up in this town and just feeling like the 19th century people were still kind of all around me and all these old sort of Greek revival buildings around me. And so a lot of it is based on true stories or stories that I heard growing up.
And do you find yourself looking at objects and wondering the same questions, or is it this particular piece of furniture that struck you?
I mean, that piece of furniture, I guess, had a big influence, but recently I've been spending a lot of time actually just sort of wandering through cemeteries, looking at the gravestones and trying to imagine the stories of those people. I mean, I guess that's what my writing projects currently are, sort of tombstone tourism, and then trying to bring those stories to life.
Yeah, I can relate to that a little bit. I like to run through cemeteries, but I also volunteered at one in my college years where I had to map out the cemetery and look at each tombstone. So that sounds very interesting. I'm sure it'll be a great story. Well, let's move on to Morgan Want. Morgan, if you could tell us about your story and read an excerpt for us.
Hi. So my story is about Hagar. She appears in the biblical book of Genesis. She was the mother of Ishmael. And her story is that she was an Egyptian slave who was part of Abraham's household. And for those who don't know the story, Abraham was told by God to leave the land of the Chaldeans and travel to Canaan, where God promised him that in his old age he would give birth to a son who would become a great nation. And considering he and his wife Sarah were both, as the biblical writers put it, pretty advanced in years, they had a hard time believing this. And so Sarah had the idea, take my Egyptian servant Hagar and maybe have a son through him. And she did give birth to a son, but that God still fulfilled his promise through Sarah, and she gave birth to Ishmael's half-brother, Isaac. And that created some conflict of personalities between Hagar and Sarah. And this story depicts a chapter whenever Hagar leaves Abraham's household. Hagar knew her time with Abraham was coming to an end when she saw her mistress Sarah watching her at the feast for Isaac's wedding. Hagar had been laughing with the other women until she noticed her. In the years that she'd lived and traveled with Abraham's household, Hagar had come to know her mistress's moods the way some men know the weather by the way of the winds, and suffering always followed Sarah's displeasure. And yet, Hagar was still surprised when, a few days later, Abraham came to her tent before sunrise and told her to gather all the supplies she could carry, along with her son Ishmael. Abraham had 2 camels ready at the edge of his camp by the time she'd roused Ishmael. He stood alone, a thin silhouette against the shrinking dark, without any other servants, and yet someone had loaded the camels with extra water, skins, and supplies. "Where are we going, Abba?" Ishmael asked, still blinking away sleep. He frowned at the tents, nestled together like sleeping sheep. There was no business Abraham would take a 15-year-old boy and his mother on alone, and even a sudden encampment would still come with at least a day's warning, so Hagar and the other women could pack while the men prepared the herds to move. Such a bright boy, Hagar thought, and he was cursed with a fool for a mother. She should have started making preparations after the feast, perhaps sooner. She knew better than anyone Sarah's capacity for spite. She should have known her mistress would no longer suffer Hagar's presence after Isaac was born. But Hagar never believed, until that moment, that Sarah could persuade him to send his firstborn away, even if he was the son of a lowly slave turned concubine.
Thank you so much, Morgan. You did such a wonderful job of humanizing Hagar. I thought that was one thing that really impressed me about this story. But I also kind of wonder, there's so many people and so many stories throughout the Bible. When did you come across Hagar, and like, did you have a special connection to her? What made you decide this is who I want to write a story about?
So I started reading the Bible when I was about 10. I grew up in the church, and Hagar's story had always kind of touched me because something that was pointed out to me once was that in the story, God is the only one to ever refer to her by name. Everyone else just refers to her as, you know, my maidservant or that Egyptian maidservant. But he addresses her by name at the lowest point in her life, probably up to that point, and in doing so acknowledges her humanity and her dignity and purpose as one of his creations, and something about that just always touched me.
Well, I think you did such a wonderful job, and it's just great to give voice to someone who was essentially voiceless.
Thank you.
Well, let's go next to Nicole Babb. Nicole, if you could tell us a little bit about your story and read an excerpt for us.
Hi, yes. I wrote No Shelter, and my story is set in late 1961, early 1962. And this is a time period where there is a lot of cultural change. There are a lot of civil rights movement. There is a lot of rights for women are changing at this time. And at the same time, the country is really gripped with this fear over nuclear war. This is when bomb shelters were making a really big appearance, across the country. And so I kind of wanted to play with that a little bit. And I wrote a serial killer story set in this time and this man who is kind of trying to capitalize on this fear. And so I'm just going to read the beginning of my story. The world is changing, and Cliff Burke hasn't yet decided if that's a good thing. People are afraid, and that can be useful, sure. But they also seem to have more fight in them, especially the women. Cliff whistles as he pulls his A55 Cambridge into the lot of Eagle Pencil Company at 8:45 a.m. His appointment isn't until 10, but he likes to be early. It gives him time to look around, make small talk. It doesn't hurt with sales either. He slips on the cheap wedding band he'd picked up a couple years back. Stepping from the car, he checks his reflection in the glossy black exterior. He looks sharp in the company uniform. Clean-shaven, white shirt, black tie, dark gray suit. All part of the brand. No slovenly salesman here. IBM is a well-oiled machine from top to bottom. He grins at himself, winks. He retrieves a heavy case from the back seat and heads inside, whistling softly. In the second-floor offices, he approaches a young secretary sitting in the center of the room. She looks up through long, dark lashes. No ring, he notes, as he smooths his tie, prominently displaying his own band. You're a sight for sore eyes, he says. But don't tell my wife. There is no wife. The woman blushes. I'm here for Mr. Barrel. We have an appointment at 9. That's it.
Thanks, Nicole. I hate to say this, but I love the character of Cliff Burke. He is clearly a psychopath. Can you talk about how you were able to do that? Because I'm assuming you're not crazy, but he just comes off as so creepy and so like assured of himself in a way that's just off-putting.
This is probably going to be a surprise, but this is not the first serial killer piece I've written. I find them interesting. I don't know. I like it. But yeah, I enjoyed developing him as a character because I had to do a lot of research about, um, just salesman, IBM salesman, and I feel like I kind of nailed his character, but I kind of leaned into that smarmy, charming kind of early 60s guy for him. But yeah, he was a fun character to write. So um maybe I am a little bit of a psychopath. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Was it based on any, other than the setting itself, any real people or real histories?
No, I didn't have any specific people in mind. I mean, I'm sure someone like this could have existed, obviously, at this time. I think for me, the bigger part of it was I really wanted to play with kind of turning expectations on their head. Obviously, Cliff Burke thinks that women are going to be easy prey throughout, this story because that's why he's targeting them. He thinks they're going to be easy to shove down in his bomb shelter. And there are a few characters that kind of subvert those expectations along the way. So that was kind of really what I was going for with this piece was just taking what you might expect one character to do and then having them do something different.
Well done. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and it's nice that we have so many different kinds of stories and histories here represented here. Well, next let's go to Shay Galloway. Shay, if you could tell us a little bit more about your story and read an excerpt for us.
Yeah, so mine is an epistolary story. It's like the diary of a young woman who it's set in a now defunct community in Eastern Washington on the Wyoming. I live in Washington now, on the Wyoming-Nevada border. That was called Empire. It was an African American community that only lasted about 2 decades. And so I wrote from the perspective of one of the original settlers of the community, Rosetta Meehan Spees. Okay, so December 1908, Goshen County, Wyoming. Arrived in Torrington Thanksgiving Day. Thankfully, the weather held out on the train and we managed not to freeze in that drafty carriage. Baby Howard was an angel all the way over. Of course, he's still plenty small and spending all his time sleeping when he's not eating. Even when he's eating too, I suppose. I kept him tucked in my coat, nice and warm. Chaz met us at the station and took us right out to the plot. It was night by the time we arrived. I could hardly make out the shape of the house. It's just small. Sod like the one I was born and raised, just one room right now. As it's just the 3 of us. But Chaz promised me my clapboard house soon. He and the others have called this place Empire. It will be our empire, he says. Someday we'll have a general store and churches and a school. It will be a Western outpost for colored folk. I must admit, it can be difficult to see what he envisions. I look out and all I see is dust and scrub. The winter wind bites cold. How Chaz plans to farm with no water, I cannot even begin to guess. March 1909. I have gotten so lonely and bleak some days, it's all I can do to not go out and scream into the bitter wind. Since the weather has started warming up and the ground thawing, Chaz has spent so much of the time out considering the fields, or off in Torrington ordering this or that. There are the other men's wives, of course, but I feel so small and out of place compared to them. They are all at least a decade older than me and seasoned mothers with many children. Though I appreciate the space Chaz and I get to spend alone, finally, I sometimes envy the others' full houses, like Otis and Sarah Taylor, who have not only their own kids, but their brother and his child. I miss my own sisters. Baby Howard is growing fat and fine, but his teeth are coming in, and all day and night he's crying, gnawing angrily at his little fists. One day he was carrying on, so I cried too, pacing back and forth on the packed dirt floor, bouncing him with no relief, when a knock came at the door. I at first did not want to answer it, but I was so desperate for some reprieve, I did, despite Howard's wailing and my own haggard appearance. It was one of the Taylor brothers, Baseman or Bozeman, something of the like. They're somewhat related to Chaz, cousins or by marriage. I haven't quite worked out yet. He's a big man. I've seen him out in the fields. Chaz told me he was widowed just last year, left with his little girl Elsie, about 4 years old. I'll admit his size initially frightened me, but he knocked on the door that day just to check on me and the baby after hearing Howard carrying on. He took Howard into the sunshine for a short while and let me have a moment's peace.
Thank you, Shay. Can you tell us a little more about this history? I'm curious, did you have access to any kind of firsthand accounts like the one you've put together?
No, I actually was researching for a different book when I like came up, like I like stumbled upon um the story of Empire. It didn't end up quite fitting into the book I was writing, just time-wise. And I was just so intrigued by it. Um, so yeah, I wasn't able to find a lot of like first-hand accounts. Um, I did find like genealogy, like trees. So Rosetta ends up having 17 children. So and then the rest of the story, it's like every couple of entries, she's like having another baby. So I mostly just like found them on like a genealogy website. And I had like seen some like in like the Wyoming historical archives and then the Nebraska historical archives, they had like little pieces, like news pieces about it. And so I just sort of pieced together things from what I could read there.
And did that play in your decision for the structure of doing an epistolary?
Yeah, I struggled. I really wanted to write the story and struggled for a long time on like how to approach it. And it just sort of, I, as an exercise, just sort of like, okay, I'm just going to write from the perspective of this person, and just like get their feel about how they are. And it just turned into, I never have written like an epistolary story before. So it just sort of like that felt right after trying and failing to write like a standard format of just plot.
Well, it's just fascinating to see that, we don't see all the time in between. We just see the major stages in our life and how that changed so quickly. Well, finally, let's go to Zena Ryder. Zena, if you could tell us a little bit more about your story and read an excerpt for us.
Hi, thanks. So this story started life as a scene in my novel, Committed, which is set during the American Civil War. But I decided that the scene wasn't pulling enough weight in the novel, so I cut it and then changed it a lot, like changed the point of view, changed so many things, and turned it into a short story. And it's set in a field hospital in a tent during the American Civil War. I'm lucky I'm alive. That's what everybody says anyway. I get that. I heard them same stories as every other soldier. Lose a hand or a foot, chances are you'll pull through. Arm above the elbow or leg above the knee like me, don't bet on it. I don't feel so lucky right now, though. I didn't do nothing to help the Union. But today I'll be leaving this here little tent, leaving you and the other nurses, and then you'll have these 2 cots for a couple more broken soldiers. I'll be going back home to Chestnut Hill, and nobody needs me moping around feeling sorry for myself. Ma and Susanna will need me in good spirits. No, Susanna's not my sweetheart. She's my sister. I'm the youngest, Susanna in the middle, then John. He was always good to me. After Pa died, it was John who worked and gave Ma money for the housekeeping. He's the one who gave me piggybacks up the stairs when I was little, before Ma tucked me into bed, pulling the quilt tight around my feet how I liked it, and kissing me on my forehead, my nose, my mouth. I don't hardly remember missing my pa, because John was always taking care of me and Susanna. You remind me of her, you know, same height, same dark curls. Me, I got my pa's pale, freckled skin and scraggly orange mop. But Susanna and John, they got our ma's complexion and thick black hair. John was so handsome. I could see that even when I was a boy. He was tall and strong as a dray horse, sharp as a sickle, too. He always come top or nearly top anyways in his class, even though he worked in the paper mill every night after school. And most mornings he helped out on our neighbor Putnam's farm. I sometimes heard him creeping out of the house while it was still dark and shutting the door real gentle, and I was thankful to snug down under my covers and go back to sleep. When he was still a boy, he decided he would go into lawyering. Said he'd never be short of money to take care of me and Ma and Susanna if he went into the law. Said people was always fighting each other and needing the law to sort things out. When he was done common school, he started studying them big law books and got a clerkship with old lawyer Berkeley over in Germantown. But then the war come, and Mr. Lincoln put out the call. John said he was going to enlist and lick some damn rebels, wanted to fight for the Union, said it would be dishonorable not to. I always wanted to do what John did. He said he had to go. Well, if John had to go, I had to go. Thanks.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Zena.
Thanks.
So you said this was part of a longer form manuscript. What was it about this character, this story, that wouldn't let you go, that you decided to make it into a shorter form?
Well, it was just really an aside. The person that this character is talking to, the nurse, is actually the main character in the novel. And she went and she visited a fort. I don't know if really in history she volunteered at the hospital, but given that so many women did, she probably did. And so I just kind of put myself inside that tent and imagined the kind of conversation they might have had. But it didn't really contribute to the story of the novel. So even though I really liked it, I had to cut it out. And I'm glad I did. It turned into a short story.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What about your research? Did you read some soldiers' accounts in order to make this feel so real?
Yeah, soldiers' accounts. I've read also, lots of letters from soldiers during the war. Many of them, there were terrible injuries and so on, and terrible battles. So that later in the story comes in about, listening to their descriptions of how awful the battles were. So and I also read accounts written by doctors and surgeons who performed these amputations. So the thing about the 19th century is not actually that long ago. So there's a lot of historical record to draw from.
Well, congratulations on finding a way to bring that character out and give him his own story.
Thanks.
Well, we've heard from each one of our authors. I will continue to facilitate discussion here. I have questions for them. If anyone in our audience has a question, please post it in the chat and I'll ask. Before we continue our discussion, I just want to give everyone a little bit of insight into everything that goes into making this happen. So first of all, we run a short story contest that's open starting in June. Before that, we have to gather volunteer readers. I can't afford to pay a bunch of judges. So I'm very lucky that we have a great historical fiction community, a lot of writers out there that are willing to step up and help judge the contest. And not only do they judge it, but a unique thing about our contest is we do offer feedback to everyone who submits a story. Then, of course, we receive submissions throughout the summer. We received 110 submissions for this particular contest. From there, it kind of comes down to me to decide, me and my managing editor, Robin, which ones are still in the running for the anthology. That's called the long list. And I don't remember how many exactly we had, about 25 or so. And then we reread those stories and cut it down to the top 10, which is a short list. The top 10 are all will all be published then in the anthology. And then from there, we have to decide the top 2, the winner and the runner-up. So it's super competitive. Just congratulations, of course, to our authors for, going through all that and getting to that point. Then, of course, after that, we have to publish the darn thing. So we have to get a cover designer, an interior layout designer. I have to get all the stories from each one of the authors. They're all in kind of different formats, and I have to put them into one Microsoft Word doc, read through them, proofread it. Then that gets sent on to the designers. I actually used a cover designer for this one, who is a college student. This was her first ever cover design. She's has friends with somebody who works for History Through Fiction, and I thought this was a really good opportunity for her to do a cover design. And she did a couple mock cover designs for us before this. Then once we get those files, I upload them to the distributor, and then we start, advertising and setting up events like this and marketing the book. And that was what brings us here to March 3rd. And now we start on the next contest. So it is about a year-long process, and just a lot goes into it. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys some insight into everything involved in actually publishing an anthology that ends up only being, it's not all that long. And so we really appreciate everyone who's supported this work and read the stories. If you like the stories, please go online, leave a review, go tell your friends about it, tell the librarians about it. They can order it through Ingram. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of give some insight into that. I'm seeing some questions here. General question from Jennifer. How far back in history does the story need to be to properly qualify as historical fiction? Well, there's no real definition for our contest. We actually set the year 2000. It has to be 2000 or before. Some people say 50 years. Sometimes it's just a matter of what the angle of the story is, what you're really trying to get at, whether it is a contemporary idea or you're really trying to highlight something in history using historical documentation. Do any of our authors have any thoughts on what actually classifies historical fiction? You might have to raise your hand if you wanted to say something, because I have to okay, thank you, Shay.
I've heard 30 years from some places, so which is, yeah, so it just kind of depends on where you're submitting. Some will say 30 years, some will say more than 30 years or 50 years, but I think 30 years has been the shortest amount of time I've heard. But some people have said 25 or 20 years, and so even just hearing 2000 is historical fiction is weird.
Yeah. When I've heard any time before your birth, which obviously will change because we could have historical fiction writers from 2000, born in 2005, so 2004 would count as historical fiction.
I did recently see a book marketed as historical fiction, and it was about 9/11. So
yeah, it's always changing. Well, if anyone has questions, go ahead and post those in the chat, but otherwise I'll continue to facilitate some conversation here. Maybe I'd like to know from our authors' perspectives, and just raise a hand, either literally or use the feature there so I can open up your mic. Tell me about your process of submitting and being rejected, and how long of a process was it for you? Because just because we accepted it in last year, maybe you've been working on it for a few years. Maybe you submitted it to a few contests. Can someone just kind of speak to how long of a process it was, how much editing was done, how much rejection did you go through, if you're willing to talk about that? Morgan, go for it.
So my story was actually a labor of a few years. So I'd actually written and published another story that I guess you could call biblical fiction right before this, and people seemed to like it. So I thought, well, I'll try again with Hagar, since I was always so drawn to her story. And so I started out just kind of writing down some lines that I thought, ooh, that'd be really good in this story. And so I wrote it. I almost gave up on it a couple times. I started out writing it in longhand before typing it up, and I submitted it to the same place that I published the first story, and they told me, you know, this is good. We just don't feel like it's right for us at this time. And I was like, oh, okay. And but then I heard about this awesome contest, and I thought, well, I think this would be a good fit for them.
Nice. So it will just the one, you only submitted it to two places?
Yeah,
That's really great. I mean, I love the story, so
thank
that's
you.
why we pursued it. Zena, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so in contrast to Morgan, my story, I submitted it, I think, 10 times before it found a home. So if there are any writers in watching, I just want to, give you hope that although your story, of course, needs to be of sufficient quality, there is, an aspect of subjectivity, and it's about finding that one editor who loves your story. So keep submitting, don't give up. I really love this story, so I just kept believing in it and sending it out. So I'm very happy it found a home.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
I was just going to say, in contrast, I know it feels like it was a long time from your perspective, but for me, it feels like it went so fast. So I just thought I would share that a different perspective. I started working on this last January, but then I wasn't finished with it until for submission until August. And I submitted to two places at the same time last August that both had August deadlines. And one was here and one was another anthology. Um, once I knew that I was shortlisted for this one, I withdrew from the other one. But then about a month ago, I got an email from them saying they still haven't gotten through the submissions and made a decision. So if we haven't heard from them, to be patient. So just so you know, it could be a lot longer. I mean, you already have it published by now and they're still reading them. So there are some out there just taking their time.
Well, yeah, the publishing process definitely is a long process, and it is a testament to we had so many great volunteers. But also, I probably put too much pressure on myself when I have submissions waiting, and I feel so bad. So I will stay up late sometimes just to make sure I can review submissions. Well, these stories are historical fiction. Or I'm sorry, Shay, did you want to add something?
Yeah, mine was slightly different. I kind of wrote this story for this contest. So, just like an even closer, yeah, it was like brewing. I kind of wanted to turn it into a novel, but just like couldn't get into it. And like it was just going to require so much research, that I just like didn't have the brain power for. And so I saw the contest and I was like, what if I just turn it into a short story and then I can like have a short story and maybe I can work from that. Yeah, so I essentially I don't want to like I don't want this to sound like I'm bragging. I wrote it the same week that it was due. So it just I was very surprised to get chosen because
Please
it was
humble
very much
yourself,
a like
Shay.
last minute like Hail Mary that like my students probably do all the time. So yeah, completely different journey for me too.
Well, that's interesting. I think that's a really important history to highlight. And I know you told us before the meeting that you're working on a dystopian next, but do you think you'll ever return to that? I think that would be awesome to create a whole narrative around empire.
Maybe someday I have a toddler right now and so I have a brain full of mush. I feel like it needs to be a novel. I just don't have the capacity to do the research and like find I would it is about real people, so I would want to like reach out to any descendants and like, get their okay and see how they feel about it and maybe even like get more research from them. So I would like to, it's just not, it's very far down the list.
Sure. Well, hopefully someday, I think that would be great.
Mm.
Well, these stories highlight really important historical events, historical time periods, but there's always a deeper meaning behind a story, and that's kind of what makes a story is that emotional resonance. Can any of you speak to what your story is about, the meaning behind the historical setting and characters? Rob, I know you're itching to tell us, aren't you?
Sure. I mean, I think the main thing behind my story is just the getting at the sense of belonging to a community that's not just a community in space, but also a community in time, that you feel connected to a place through the history of the place. And just, growing up in this small town, I felt like I was connected to the history. And then it was such a shock to have to move away from it to go to college and everything, and no longer feel like you're a part of it, but you were a part of that point of the community and history. And so you're sort of part of the continuum of what makes a community. So I think just the notion of places change over time, but you're still a part of that continuum.
Yeah, it's kind of that makes me think of historical markers and how we just see them as something that happened a long time ago. We kind of forget to see the connection, the through line from then to now. Zena, did you want to add to that?
Sure, yeah. So there's not really a message in my story, but there are a couple of things that I'm hoping that at the end readers might think about. So one is the role of, luck or chance when it comes to when we sort of morally evaluate the actions of ourselves and others. I've always found that idea fascinating, that things that are beyond our control nevertheless kind of influence our moral judgments. And then the other thing is really about values and morality surrounding things like masculinity and courage and bravery and honor, and how those values may or may not have changed from the mid-19th century to now. So those are just a couple of things that I hope that some readers might reflect on at the end of the story.
I wonder if you could elaborate too. You said this came from a longer form piece. What is that you're working on? How far along are you on that?
So that novel is finished. I'm currently querying agents with that one. So it's about a young woman during the American Civil War. She was a famous orator, and she got committed to an insane asylum. So it's inspired by a real person, highly fictionalized, very greatly removed from her real life, but inspired by a real person, Anna Elizabeth Dickinson.
Can you tell us a little bit about that process of querying agents?
It's awful. So it's a very, very long process. I've currently sent, I think, about 35 letters to agents, sort of trying to get attention for the novel. No bites yet, but fingers crossed.
Well, good for you. I know it is a challenging process. There's so many little nuances to learn about. History Through Fiction is hosting a conference later this month, and we have agent pitch sessions, and that's one of the most popular things at the conferences. Authors signing up to actually sit one-on-one with an agent, because it is so rare to get that one-on-one attention.
But that sounds terrifying, though. One-on-one in person with an agent.
Well, our author, Gillian Forsberg, she met with agent Jessica Berg at the Historical Novel Society conference in Las Vegas last summer, and that ended up working out because Jessica signed her. So you never know.
Yeah.
Just gotta put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Well, Rachel, maybe we can bring you back in. Your title is San Francisco is Buckled, San Francisco is Burning. It's not a short title. How did you land on that and be like, okay, yeah, this works?
I am candidly terrible at titles, and I struggle every time. And with this story, for whatever reason, the phrase I was working on, I was like, oh, this sounds great to me. And I remember my husband hated it, still hates it. But I usually would say, like, well, I can see your point, but it's a mouthful, but I kind of like the cadence of it. And I think at some point I said, no, I should just change it to San Francisco is Burning, which is, I think, fine, but I didn't want to lose the buckled, so I stuck with it.
Well, you can tell your husband I liked it. I think it works.
Thank you. I will tell him you said it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the museum? I'm not familiar with that museum, and I think that's awesome that a place like that inspired you to share this story.
Oh yeah, it's in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. It's the Natural History Museum, and they changed it. I went back a couple years ago. It's now like a dual exhibit between the 1906 earthquake and the Loma Prieta in 1989, I think. And so they do a comparison. You go into this room and it shakes approximately the length and intensity of first earthquake in 1989, and then they say here's 1906, and the amount of time it goes on and on and on it's terrifying. And as a kid, I thought it was very exciting. Doing that as an adult, it really drives home like how it's nice to have a tactile like representation of how horrifying the event was. So yeah, it's a wonderful museum though. If you're ever in San Francisco, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine. I live in a place where there are no earthquakes. I've experienced one when I was in Montana camping and the earth shook, and I could not figure out what was happening because I've never experienced that before. I can't imagine how scary it would be, especially if you're in a city like that.
Yeah. And when I was a kid, I thought everything was kind of exciting, but I do remember the one in 89 because everything in our house started shaking and just like into the middle, like things just falling off the walls and stuff. And I mean, I haven't lived there. I've lived in New Orleans since 2004. So, different kinds of natural disasters here, but the earthquakes are still, it's, yeah, there's something really unsettling about them to me.
Sure, yeah. Well, Nicole, we haven't heard from you in a while. I wonder if you can tell us about something else you're working on. Or maybe you had told us about this before the meeting. You are working on some microfiction.
Yeah, that's what a friend, she's been making a series of collages that focus on women, and they kind of, I know, go across a bunch of timelines. Like I have one right now that looks like a medieval peasant, and I have one that is like a 1960s housewife. I don't know if I'm gonna put her in a bomb shelter yet, but I'm doing little series of 100-word microfiction pieces to go with every collage. And so it's going to be a series. And I don't know what we're doing with it yet, but just working with someone else is kind of fun. Writing can be so interior and such a solo sport. It's kind of exciting to work with someone else and do something based off of their vision and not just what's in my own head. So it's been different, but it's been fun and it's been inspiring. I've been in a little bit of a slump, honestly, since late last year. So this has kind of shaken me out of it, and that's been exciting.
Do you guys ever butt heads, or is it really collaborative and it makes the whole thing stronger?
Right now it's in really early stages, but I think it'll be more collaborative than headbutting. I think it's going to be okay. We haven't had either yet. It's kind of just getting off the ground. So I was working this weekend. She kind of does the art separately and then sends it to me. And so I've been working on the microfiction pieces kind of on my own. And I'm going to put together a series of them and then kind of send it back to her in a chunk to be like, do you like what I've done with your art or do you hate it? So we'll see.
Nice. Well, that sounds really fun. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Well, we're running up against the hour. I'm going to post a link here in the chat to the anthology in our store. I have a whole bunch of copies still. So if anybody wants one, you can pick one up from our store and I will ship it to you personally. Otherwise, if you maybe you can't afford an anthology right now, just posting about it on social media helps a lot. Telling friends, telling booksellers, librarians, just talking about it is fantastic. I want to thank everyone for coming and supporting what we're doing here with these literary works, with historical fiction. And then before I leave off, I guess I can leave our authors with any last words. Would anyone like to have anything that they want to add before we call it a day? Okay, well, thank you once again, and look for our next our short story contest. Opens June 15th. I'm putting it up on, you can find it at historythroughfiction.com/submission guidelines. It'll be on our Duo Summa submission platform. I'm also going to put it up on Submittable this year. If you're a writer and you're familiar with Submittable, you can search History Through Fiction there. And I hope you'll submit your work, and maybe you'll be on our panel next year. So thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful day.